black gold, Texas tea. Well, the first thing you know, old Jed's a millionaire. The kinfolk said, Jed, move away from there. Said, California is the place you ought to be. So they loaded up the truck and they moved to Beverly Hills, that is, swimming pools, movie stars.
The Beverly Hillbillies.
Come and listen to my story about a man named Jed. A poor mountaineer barely kept his family fed. And then one day he was shooting at some food, and up through the ground come a bubbling crude oil, that is, black gold, Texas tea. Well, the first thing you know, old Jed's a millionaire. The kinfolk said, Jed, move away from there. Said, California is the place you ought to be. So they loaded up the truck and they moved to Beverly Hills, that is, swimming pools, movie stars.
The Beverly Hillbillies.
Come and listen to my story about a man named Jed. A poor mountaineer barely kept his family fed. And then one day he was shooting at some food, and up through the ground come a bubbling crude oil, that is, black gold, Texas tea. Well, the first thing you know, old Jed's a millionaire. The kinfolk said, Jed, move away from there. Said, California is the place you ought to be. So they loaded up the truck and they moved to Beverly Hills, that is, swimming pools, movie stars.
The Beverly Hillbillies.
Come and listen to my story about a man named Jed. A poor mountaineer barely kept his family fed. And then one day he was shooting at some food, and up through the ground come a bubbling crude oil, that is, black gold, Texas tea. Well, the first thing you know, old Jed's a millionaire. The kinfolk said, Jed, move away from there. Said, California is the place you ought to be. So they loaded up the truck and they moved to Beverly Hills, that is, swimming pool.
Salvete vos, salvete vos. Hello, everyone. I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute, Institute for the Humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. The purpose of this live broadcast and recording is to pregame our project. And so we shall. We are about to enter the autumn semester. Next week, after the American holiday of Labor Day, we're going to commence week 1 of 13 of ApocatastasisInstitute's innovative curriculum called The Project. So I'm going to talk about that today. I'm going to talk about Apocatastasis in general, and then we're going to get into some specifics. So we're just hanging out here this morning and not too formal. This is the last time you're going to see me without a tie for a very long stretch. The summer won out, but I should say the summer holiday won out. I actually quite dislike the idea that summer ends at Labor Day. We've still a good month and a half to go, and I mean to make the most out of it, and you mean to make the most out of it as well. However, the summer break did win out, and I did slide into these comfy polo shirts, so we'll have to keep them off camera as we go along here and get back into the tie and jacket. So we have a lot of good stuff coming up here, and these will be regular broadcasts. Moving along, I'm going to put some nice background music on. It'll sound a little loud at first, but we'll tone it down. There we go. Are you relaxed yet? Are you not Are you not entertained? Okay. So here we are. And, okay. Let's get our screen share queued up, and then we'll get into what Apocatastasis's is, if you're unfamiliar, and the project, and we'll go from there. It's a beautiful day in Connecticut. Absolutely stellar weather outside. The chemtrail men are on holiday, it seems, as well, so that's just as good. And I noticed in the Gospel of today's Mass that we're coming to the end of St. Matthew's Gospel. We're in the 23rd chapter, and usually about this time of year, it's about time to switch over to St. Mark, and that means the year is getting a bit long in the tooth, and indeed the turning of the seasons is upon us altogether. All right, so let's just take a tech check, and okay, everything seems very nice. If you're not familiar, you young people, this is a still from an old sitcom. I don't think it was called a sitcom back then, but the Beverly Hillbillies. And this is the wagon that they had to load up in the beginning to move out after they got their wealth from oil, as the song informed us about. And it's funny, at a certain point in my life, I assisted at a church that would do a pilgrimage up in northern New York for a while. And the joke was the truck they used to load up the altars and all the paraphernalia, and they had to trek this thing across the state. This truck, the joke was that it reminded one of the Beverly Hillbillies truck, because it was so ramshackle and especially when it was loaded up. And so have that memory as well when I see this. But we are setting out on a journey. That's the reason I chose this still image, and I chose the reference to Uncle Jed and all this stuff. We're setting out on a journey. Now, before I get into what the project is, just a few words on Apocatastasis. ApocatastasisInstitute, as I already said, is an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. We have in-person classes, and for those who cannot make it here to Western Connecticut, we can meet online. And we've been around since Holy Saturday of 2013, if memory serves. Yes. 2013, Holy Saturday of 2013. We specialize, if you might guess, in the humanities, although we are broadening out a little bit into the so-called STEM fields. And we've some very competent teachers in Vandana Rataria and Adam Myers when it comes to mathematics. And in days gone by, we've had Ian Spellman and his lifeology course. So we do focus on the humanities, and as we're going to learn this semester, and I hope you can join us every week, and then perhaps you will even join us in class. Something else that we focus on is what we call the integrated humanities and relational education. So one of the great problems of modern pedagogy, and when I say that, I'm not just talking about the public schools, I'm talking about your religious schools, I'm talking about your home schools, definitely your unschools, your road schools, your high schools, your grade schools. I'm talking about all modern pedagogy, even modern pedagogy, that is pedagogy is one's teaching philosophy and one's teaching practice. All of these systems, even the ones who appeal to being old-fashioned or pre-modern or classical, they are all more or less guilty of the same sin, and that is the slicing up of knowledge into different categories. That's not bad, actually. What is bad, sinful, what is bad in this is that these sciences are not integrated at all, and nor are they ever meant to be. And in fact, I have a lot of critiques of modern pedagogy, one of which I just shared with you, and then I have critiques that you often maybe don't hear, and I suppose that is one of them, the more epistemological problem of modern learning. And a lot of people, they get hung up when they're critiquing modern education, so-called. They get hung up on what is being taught, on the books that are being taught, on what is coming out of the teacher's mouth, if that is even accurately being conveyed, which is another discussion altogether. But it is this splitting, the shattering of knowledge, which I believe is the true damage and indeed the true agenda of Rockefeller education. And I must insist, so again, that when we speak of modern pedagogy, I am just as equally critical of your private schools of various affiliations. I am just lumping in as robustly homeschool, unschool. I'm not just talking about grade school, I'm talking about college. This critique is across the board, and it produces, how do I know this? How do I know it's across the board? Because it is producing the exact same people. Have you not noticed that? Have you not noticed that by the time a child turns man at 20 and 30 years of age, whether they came out of a public school or a private secular school or a private religious school or a home school or unschool or road school, have you not noticed that they are producing by the age of 20 and 30 the exact same sort of people? Well, I argue the reason is partially and largely part of the problem is this large observation. That's not a contradiction. Partially and largely are not contradictory terms. Partially and largely, that has to do with the shattering of knowledge, which is present in all modern modalities of so-called education. So, getting back to Apocatastastis, getting back to the project, we hope to work against that. A lot of people sitting around complaining, especially when it comes to the state of colleges. A lot of people sitting around complaining when it comes to high schools. A lot of people giving out ideas. We're living it. We're verbing it. What we're about to get into here in the project is part of that verbing solution. And so, you can learn all about Apocatastasis and our philosophies, because we have many teachers and many students, and we all have different personalities, and we're all able to hang out with each other. And that's a big thing about us at Apocatastasis, is people have different beliefs, and we don't have to be enemies. We can all get along, and we can somehow make a great synthesis and a great mess, a good fun mess with all of the backgrounds that we have. And we don't have to be suspicious about the other and so forth. It's a marvelous thing. And you should try it sometime. I should try it. We're verbing it anyhow in Connecticut. Okay, so the project. What do we mean by the project? You can have a link down below in the description as to what the project is. The project is, if I'm going to be crude, our top shelf product at the Institute. I cringe more than you to use that language. If I were to be a capitalist, it's our top shelf product. It is our unified humanities curricula. Right now, it's a little embryo. It's a little zygote, the project. In time, the project will be expanded. Not a very long time. The project is moving along. So in a nutshell, when we speak of the project, we mean this unified curricula, which will be published in what will probably work out to 4 Bible-sized versions, or volumes rather. So here happens to be a copy of the Liturgy of the Hours. So 4 of these work out to something like this length in 4 volumes, broken up by the seasons. So we are about to enter the fall semester, but also the fall volume. Soon enough, by next week, after Labor Day, we will have the first volume, its embryo form, available. This involves a monthly cycle of poetry, about 260 odd poems, that's 260, thereabouts, that are read perpetually on a monthly cycle, much like the breviary uses the Book of Psalms on a certain cycle. Then, over the course of 4 volumes, there are historical and literary texts, as well as artistic and philosophical texts, which are synchronized. Meaning, for instance, if one is reading about ancient Rome, we're reading in the literary section, perhaps Virgil's Aeneid, which is from the 1st century BC. If we're actually 1st century AD, if we're reading about Rome and Virgil's Aeneid, perhaps we're reading the Metamorphoses for religion or philosophy, and maybe we're reading some some historiographical text on how that 1st century has been presented over time, whatever the case may be. And the same with any other period of history. The point is, it's integrated. And in time, we will see the variations of this, because another feature of the project is that it has to be variable for variable vocations. Meaning, we need, first and foremost, a solid presentation of human life and letters on this earth. After that, we need something that we can teach. After that, we need to make it appropriate to a various spectrum of students. First and foremost are those students that are enrolled in our undergraduate program, where the project will be their main focus. But also our alumni, because they're still on the journey with us if they wish to be, and we hope so. Also our monthly students, and we would also include in time the integration of our open events, which is a series we run at the Institute. Eventually, and very soon, I should say, these will all be coordinated. I need to finish the first volume in zygote form first, and then finally, the project has to be appropriate to the general public. Now, what you're enjoying right now in this live broadcast and recording is that 4th group, the general public. If you are intrigued by this project and wish to commit yourself more deeply to understanding human history and letters in a classroom setting, I encourage you to enroll at Apocatastastis. Like I say, we have many options for many people in their lives. If you're a grade school student or a traditionally college-age student, you have a certain elbow room to your schedule that a married man does not have, or someone later on in life altogether. So we have many options for full-time students, for bi-weekly students, a kind of running seminar format, monthly students, and so forth. So we have all sorts of enrollment options here. And yet, maybe you're not interested in that. We hope you can join us every week as we cover that week's reading in a general focus. So if you want to get deeper at the Institute, we're here for you. And in addition to the reading, of course, if you do enroll in any capacity, you will be able to participate in more complex class lectures, private lectures, obviously classroom discussions, more specialized reading, appropriate always to the time period we're looking at, and indeed writing and assessment assignments, which you may not think are so fun, but it will add a whole other level of depth to study. So that is what Apocatastasis is, and that is what we're setting out with Uncle Jed and the wagon here for the Beverly Hillbillies. We're setting out on this learning journey. Next week, after American Labor Day, we're getting into the first week of 13. So each of the 4 volumes of fall, winter, spring, and summer, each of the 4 volumes has 13 weeks. You come to find that you can break up the 52 weeks of the year into 13-week blocks. Next week, we're starting week 1 of 13 of the fall semester. And that, of course, is true for all of the classes beyond our integrated humanities teaching. And you can find out some more variations about the project, because eventually we'll be open over a 2-year span. But I don't want to get too nitty gritty, because we have some really juicy stuff to get into when it comes to literature and history, where we're going in our time ahead. Now that we know what is Apocatastastis, what is the project, now we're moving into some specifics. Why study literature and history? What is our main text? Right now, our main text is H.G. Wells's Outline of History. And we've broken that up day by day over the weeks. And as I say, next week, you will be able to download that and join us, even if you don't enroll, week by week. And in time, there will be auxiliary readings which will flesh this out, and you'll be able to get much deeper. Right now, we're focused week by week on H.G. Wells's Outline of History. So we're going to get to know what is this outline of history, the skeleton upon which we hang our project. Now, we have a poem. And before we get into that poem, just let me check the tech, make sure everything is going well. And so it is. Okay. So sometimes the broadcast poops out and you're talking for half an hour. So occasionally I will have to check in there, and you're talking for half an hour and nothing's being recorded, which is not what you might have signed up for. I've certainly had that happen. Anyway, every week we're going to enjoy a poem. As I mentioned, poetry is the heart of the project. Before every reading selection, we have 3 poems. And I should say, speaking about the project, and here is our website and the project subsite, as the case may be. If this reminds you, if this way of reading and studying reminds you of the Christian liturgy, well, there's a reason for that. And that's because the breviary, or the Liturgy of the Hours, or the Book of Common Prayer, the Missal, whatever you want to call that category of book, the category of text, was very influential and is very influential to us at the Institute. We pray the Divine Office with the staff and students every day. You're always welcome to join us there. There's a subsite to that end, which you can access and just click on it and drop in to pray with us. But also, just organizationally, the genius of the breviary and liturgical prayer in general. This is our poetry cursus, which you can download right now for free. Soon enough, this is going to be married to the autumn segment of the Outline of History. But if you know anything about liturgical spirituality, you'll know one of the geniuses of that over the years is to come to a fantastic and synoptical understanding of the life of faith, which cannot be had in any other fashion. Just the long-term reviewing and ruminating over morsels of the Church Fathers, of the Holy Bible, of the hymnody of the Church, antiphons and so forth, slowly mulling over and going over and over and over these things over years and decades produces a familiarity and a synoptical vision of the life of faith, which cannot, as I say, be had anywhere else. Well, I said, why not do that with secular studies, with profane studies? And so the influence of the Christian liturgy and the pedagogical genius of it certainly played a large role and plays a large role in the project altogether. So anyhow, here is our site, and you can download our different resources here, and more will be added. So here's a poem, and it is The School Where I Studied. You know, we're getting into the semester next week and kind of consider our school time. Even if you only join us on these live free broadcasts and you never enroll, you are still part of our school community, and we want you to get in that right headspace. So the school where I studied by Yehuda Amichai, translated by Chana Block. I passed by the school where I studied as a boy, and I said in my heart, here I learned certain things, and didn't learn others. All my life I have loved in vain. The things I didn't learn, I am filled with knowledge. I know all about the flowering of the tree of knowledge, the shape of its leaves, the function of its root system, its pests and parasites. I'm an expert on the botany of good and evil. I'm still studying it. I'll go on studying till the day I die. I stood near the school building and looked in. This is the room where we sat and learned. The windows of a classroom always open to the future. But in our innocence, we thought it was only a landscape we were seeing from the window. The schoolyard was narrow, paved with large stones. I remember the brief tumult of the two of us near the rickety steps, the tumult that was the beginning of a first great love. Now it outlives us, as if in a museum, like everything else in Jerusalem. And again, that poem is The School Where I Studied by Yehuda Amichai, translated by Chana Block. Okay, so that's our poem for today. And now we get into our main course. You've had your, what's the word? So we have in America the appetizer and the entree. What's the word for in the French? I mean, appetizer and entree are French words. Certainly entree is. I think appetizer is an Americanism. But there is actually a French word for something that precedes the appetizer. So I remember there was a word. It was simply to get the gastronomic juices in your stomach flowing. It's not an appetizer. Anyway, you've got in your teas with the explanation of Apocatastastis and the project. You have your appetizer. That was your poem. Now we're getting into the entree. And the entree is going to begin with an article from Education Week, and that is Why Study History and Literature. And then after that, we're going to get into the introduction to H.G. Wells's Outline of History, which right now is occupying, and for the year ahead, is occupying our main focus. Week by week, it is the Outline of History, which we will be encountering. Behind the scenes, behind the scenes, what I'm going to be doing is adding additional selections, including from the Story of Civilization by Will and Ariel Durant. In fact, before I settled on the Outline of History for its usability, the project was supposed to primarily consist of the Story of Civilization. But that project, that output is far too big to realistically cover in 1 year. I wanted a hardcore skeleton that I could hang our history study on, and even hang subsequent years. And that turned out to be the Outline of History. We're going to get into Wells's introduction, but in future classes, week by week, we're going to be meeting online. And if you want to enroll, we're going to meet separately and have some in-person discussion privately about this. So if you're interested in enrolling, check that out. But, none of the selections here are the final word on human history. And at Apocatastasis, that's, kind of that nuance is something we're trying to reclaim for various reasons, not the least of which is the lack of reading that most people are doing. Most people in our society in the West are what you call illiterate, meaning almost everyone can read. and to a certain extent is reading, and in a strange way, perhaps is reading more than certain generations of people past. However, what we're reading is completely disjointed and usually does not arise in any greater complexity than an article. So it is true that more people now are reading than in the past, but what they're reading are text messages, they're reading street signs, they're reading menus. They might be reading articles, they might dick around with a book on their nightstand, but they're not readers. They're not deeply reading. And one of the consequences of that, greatly exacerbated by the Silicon Valley eunuchs who control these algorithms and these social media things, one of the consequences of that is an appeal to the sensationalistic, and also black and white thinking tends to obtain, and we can certainly see that in our day and age. Well, at Apocatastastis, that's not the case. I do not agree with everything in the outline of history. That's okay, because the outline of history does what I need it to do and does what you need it to do, which is to give us a workable skeleton upon which to hang our study of human life. We don't need to agree with every single word. That's okay. That's okay. Maybe we'll learn something by listening to people we don't agree with. And actually, next week, when I publish in PDF form, volume 1 of the project, it will include 2 counter essays concerning the outline of history, principally from Hilaire Belloc and G.K. Chesterton, who had their own rather rough words about the outline of history. That's okay too. We can have nuance, we can have critical observations and still use the outline of history. Anyway, the first article here, and I just want to double check the place this comes from. I think it was Education Week. Education Week. So what we're about to read is a version of an article, an adaptation, basically a book selection from September 9th, 1987 from Education Week. Talk about keeping old authors alive. Okay. Because I chose this article because the project has a hefty amount of literature. You may or may not know this. And by the way, this article is by Diane Ravitch and Chester Finn Jr. You may not know this, but having a little bit of history training, I can tell you that the disciplines we consider as separate today, the study of history, the study of literature, originally were the same thing. And there's a good reason for that. I'm not poo-pooing the fact that they split into 2 separate disciplines, but the study of literature, I guess we're going to find out, but for my 2 cents, the study of literature allows one to obtain a certain feel of a time period that simply cannot be had from monographs and more traditional history as we understand it. There's a certain emotional, artistic element that literature necessarily raises for us, and can raise that idea of the zeitgeist in a way that simply cannot be had in more cut and dry history. So we read that this is an excerpt from a book, chapter of What Do Our 17-Year-Olds Know, by Diane Ravitch and Chester Finn Jr., to discuss the importance of history and literature in the American high school curricula. And I should say at Apocatastastis here, we do accept students of about 15 years of age on up, accepting our math program and our Latin program, which we accept younger students in grade school. So the project and these presentations are taught in an undergraduate level, and your average 16, 15-year-old can certainly grasp that. Speaking of splitting things up, I don't want to get off track here, but it really wasn't until after World War II that you go to high school and then you go to college. Prior to World War II, after junior high, you either went to high school, in which case that was like a trade school, or you went to college at 13 years of age and got more so-called white-collar training. It's only because of a lot of shenanigans that labor unions played here in these United States that you see the imposition of high school across the board. There's a good book called The Rise and Fall of the American Teenager by Thomas Hine. The Rise and Fall of the American Teenager, and he gets into this. It's actually not until after World War II you have more than 50%, 50, of young people attending high school. It wasn't done beforehand. You either dropped out of school and helped on the farm, or you went, as I say, to high school, like a trade school, or you went to college at 13 or 14 years of age. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let's hop into this. We urge the study of history and literature because we believe they are important. It is not simply because they are repositories for our cultural heritage. And I hope you're loading up as you and I are starting off on this project this semester for the next 13 weeks, starting next week. This is just a pregame today. But I hope as you're loading up your academic Uncle Jedediah's truck, right? If you want a visual, this is what we're doing today. We're loading up the old truck to get ready for our journey into human history and human literature, starting from the dawn of mankind. I hope you're loading in different things to the truck. And one of them is, what are we doing? And why are we studying all of human history in this project? History and literature are repositories for cultural heritage. The study of human life on this earth is a study of cultural heritage. If you read volume 1 of Will Durant's series, much like H.G. Wells, he gets into these more philosophical questions of what are we doing? And Durant begins that. In fact, it might be in the very first line, if not the very first paragraph. And of course, this series, The Story of Civilization, took up about 70 years of his and his wife's life. So you imagine, just like the Bible or the Quran or the Declaration of Independence, you might imagine that the opening words are very important. And so, indeed, this is from our Oriental Heritage, Volume 1. I'm nearly choking on the mustiness of this volume, by the way, right now. Yeah, civilization is social order promoting cultural creation. This is the story of civilization. What is civilization? Social order promoting cultural creation. So getting back to our article here, we see that history and literature are repositories for our cultural heritage. Nor is it merely that they help us understand the past. Those who study these subjects become more knowledgeable, more perceptive, and more intelligent by doing so. They learn about the forces, individuals, trends, and events that shaped the present. They discover from their own experience the power of novels, poems, plays, and stories to move, delight, entertain, inform, shock, and reveal us to ourselves. Put that on the wagon, Uncle Jedediah. Put that on the wagon. Why are we studying the project? Why are you and I embarking on this journey? Well, we find out here. They reveal us to ourselves. One of the great sins of modern pedagogy, and I am not just talking about your public school down the road. I am talking about your homeschool. I'm talking about your religious private school. I'm talking about you unschoolers. One of the biggest problems that we have leaned into and it's a consequence of the consumer culture, is the idea that an education is for a job. It is for an utilitarian end. It is not. Formal education reveals us to ourselves. Formal education's job, the reason you go to school, the reason you get your degree, is not to go work for some capitalist and go make some stranger rich. The reason you study history, literature, math, gym, home ec, religion, music, and on, biology. Why do you study these things? To reveal you to yourself. Lest we be consumers and think we're atomized, how about this? To reveal us to ourselves. That's why we're setting out here. That's why we study. That's why this is a lifelong project. The whole idea of the project is not just to go through this one time. This is one of our PDFs here. The whole point of the project, and indeed the whole point of ApocatastasisInstitute, is not just to study something once. The idea in these breviary volumes, so-called, that we'll be putting out, first one's out next week in PDF form, is to go over these every single year on a 2-year cycle for the rest of your life. What? Why read the same book again and again? Because it gives you and I a skeleton to hang things off of and allows us a sober way to go deeper into the subject. So every year you're hitting the exact same readings, but they invite discussions and they invite additional study, which can go into 1,000 different directions. It is controlled, I don't want to say controlled chaos. No, controlled study. That's one of the reasons schools exist. And right now, AI is the hot thing. And everyone wants to talk about AI and AI when it comes to education. And I think most schools will be shutting up pretty soon. I've said that for years. It's amazing when it comes to certain subjects how prescient I can be. And I call things years and years before they happen. And I said this some time ago, that when the change to education happened, it's going to happen so fast, your head is going to spin. Something which seemed this adamantine mountain, the education system, seemed impossible to budge, is very soon going to be unrecognizable compared to what you've known it as. And most of it is going to go away. And most of the population are so consumerized and so lowbrow and so utilitarianized that they won't know or care that most formal schools are going away. Well, one of the reasons that schools exist, for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, one of the reasons schools exist, and I really do welcome the opportunity to justify the existence of schools. This is actually one of the cool things about AI, as all of the herd, the canal, is running out the door. School's out for summer. You'll see, because basically there'll just be some job certification coming up for a generation, and then we're gonna have some other discussions about depopulation, but that's indeed another topic. But for a generation, the high school degree, the college degree will be replaced by just some basic bitch working papers that you'll get with some some job training study. So school, as you know and I know, is going away very fast. The population could care less at this point, and could care less for several decades already at this point. The middle class, which was once known for its love of learning and for its future preference and its discipline, ain't the middle class of 1920. Let's just put it that way. It's not the middle class of 1925. The middle class of 20 and 25 is a brutish, present preference, herdish, consumeristic, atomized child. And for several decades, a type of chat has obtained concerning formal education, including in certain circles, which I'm a little embarrassed that I kind of affiliate with, the so-called alternative education, which is becoming so anti-intellectual that it would warrant its own show, I suppose, some other time. So, as every Tom, Dick, and Harry is running to the door, I actually do welcome the opportunity to explain why schools exist, and it gets to this very line and why the project exists. And that is to reveal us to ourselves. Yes, in my earlier point, I said I didn't like the term organized chaos. Also, the reason schools exist, this is where I was going, was because, and is because, it organizes knowledge in a unique way. For instance, right now we're running a course, or we will very shortly, with Dr. James Fetzer on, here we go, on conspiracies. And that's a juicy topic. People seem to like it. The algorithms seem to like it. There's Dr. Fetzer, jolly old fella. And look at this. Oh, no, don't want that. Hold on. It's the video. I don't want the video. You want the video. You want to check it out. But there's the poster. Schools organize knowledge. So you could spend all day and all night and all summer and all fall going through JFK, 9/11, the moon landing, Paul Wellstone, wowzers, Sandy Hook, Pizzagate, right? You can go down all the rabbit holes, but the problem is there's no organization whatsoever to this knowledge. The internet, and to a lesser extent, your public library, has unbelievable amounts of data. That is great. But you can see Tom, Dick, and Harry that I mentioned, the general public has no idea how to integrate this. You couldn't. You need a scaffolding, and that's what the project allows when it comes to history and literature, or in this case, so Dr. Fetzer allows when it comes to conspiracies, right? This overall critical thinking framework that he's going to present things in. And we do need to realize that and try to appreciate, maybe put that on our Uncle Jedediah wagon. What do schools offer? And why should we have schools and formal learning? Why will it be not a good thing when 99% of the people, as soon as it becomes socially acceptable for the middle class, who's constantly looking over their shoulders to see what everyone else is doing, as soon as everyone else, with big air quotes, is running off to get their basic bitch job certification, as soon as that becomes socially acceptable, and people run out the door, why that will be a bad thing is because they will have lost and have turned their backs on the unified knowledge that schools ought to be providing. Now, I've already said that probably for a century, schools have been very much dropping the ball. And I think that has to do with much deeper philosophical agendas in what I call Rockefeller education. But nevertheless, there's always the potential there. And even the scatterbrained modern Rockefeller schools and homeschools based on the same thing, same model, might have a cross on the wall or something. Just to say, you got a Quran, you got your Quran class, you got your religion there, whatever. But it is fundamentally the same problem. But even the Rockefeller education offers a synchronization of knowledge, which is even in its weakened state, is greater than the chaotic mass of infinite data which people get online. History and literature are the essential studies of the humanities because they interrupt for us the human experience. Put that on your Uncle Jedediah wagon too. These studies interrupt the human experience. To the extent that we are knowledgeable about these subjects, we are better able to communicate with one another. And the more knowledgeable we are, the more complicated are the discussions that we can have together. Paradoxically, the broader our shared background knowledge, the better able we are to argue, debate, and disagree with one another. There's an American loudmouth, political commentator, And listening to this man, if a man he be, it struck me this individual has a profound knowledge of a very limited bandwidth of not just political discourse in 2025, but American political discourse. He does no knowledge. This individual who can wax eloquent, or not that eloquent, but can certainly wax loquacious on all sorts of political things that fall within that very limited range of his political consciousness. And this is a rather well-known figure. It struck me that this individual has no knowledge, not only of larger politics outside of America, but nothing beyond politics. You never hear him make a literary reference, a workaday reference. I was putting gas in the car today. I was down at the supermarket today. He never makes any references to natural science. This individual has a profound knowledge of a very limited bandwidth, and nobody calls him on it. And this is a well-known character, well-known cat, and also an example of someone who cannot disagree, right? He's a perfect example of what I alluded to earlier of contemporary men not being able to disagree with each other, that they have to see the other as an enemy. History and literature enable us to better argue, debate, and better disagree with each other. I'm not the first one to notice this. In this town here, there's a group of people that were so alarmed by the inability of people to disagree civilly that they actually made a club in town. It's called the Better Angels Club, and they just talk about not having to fight over politics and worldview and culture conf all the time. How can we better disagree with one another? Well, history and literature are a good example of that. I want to just check the tech now, make sure that we're copacetic, everything is grand. Okay. But we will all possess a sufficiency of that shared knowledge, will we? Or will it become the near exclusive property of the more fortunate among us? Remember that not all members of the 17-year-old generation are equally at risk. Some of them possess a decent reservoir of knowledge of history and literature, and those who do tend, with significant exceptions, to be children of the well-educated, the well-employed, the well-motivated, and the well-off. And we're seeing that with the breakdown of the middle class, and some of it's their own doing, and some of it's the doing of their masters. You can see that once again, the humanities are becoming the preserve of the hoi polloi and of the toffs, as the British say, of the upper classes, as they were for much of human history. In fact, right now, while you and your sons and daughters are chasing around MBAs and accounting degrees and STEM degrees, what are the sons of the senators and the bloodline ruling families and the millionaires? And what are their daughters studying? What are the sons and daughters of the ruling class studying in Harvard and Yale and Cambridge and Brown and so forth? I can tell you one thing, it's not the STEM fields. That's what they give to the herd. That's what they give to the goyim. What do they study down the road? What did the hoi polloi, the millionaires, study at Yale and Harvard? I can tell you, having been to Yale plenty of times, that they're studying the humanities. They give you your MBAs and your STEM degrees to go further around and make someone else rich. But their children are studying religion. Their children are studying languages, history, philosophy. And it was the great, capital L, liberal idea to bring the education of the hoi polloi to the masses and to make that opportunity available to them. That was the great dream of public education. And whatever critiques we might make of public education, we must not forget that vision, because it is a wholesome and a holy vision to make this life of the mind available, especially because not to be too utilitarian, but especially because in capital L liberal societies such as these United States, the educated electorate is the safety valve against tyranny. It actually serves a civic function. That's why you have libraries and public schools and NPR and the Smithsonian and all those museums besides in Washington. The reason these things exist in liberal, capital L, classically liberal America, is because the educated, engaged, informed citizenry is the safety valve to demagogues and to grandstanders. And it is not a good sign to see the hoi polloi turning against their public schools, turning against their libraries, turning against NPR and PBS. Whatever critiques you and I might make of, shall we say, the editorial policy of things like public broadcasting, it is not, civilly speaking and socially speaking, a good thing that the herd is turning against these things which benefit them. Anyway, we read on. It is a pattern as old as civilization. Society's elites nearly always strive to ensure that their sons and daughters acquire enough of the knowledge and cultural lore and the intellectual traits associated with success in that society. And while success in American society be it gauged in terms of wealth, prestige, public office, scholarly distinction, social status, or whatever, does not automatically follow from being well versed in such subjects as history and literature, one's prospects are certainly enhanced by being, quote unquote, culturally literate. Throw that on your Uncle Jedediah learning wagon. To be culturally literate. You know, we used to have this term of enrichment. Why would you take a class as an adult? Why would you go to a lecture at the library? For enrichment. Now people are so averse to enrichment that employers have to insist as part of the employment contract. This is the case for teachers, I'm sad to say, that the teachers actually have to be kicked in the behind to go to enrichment workshops. Why do they have to be kicked in the behind? Because they have lost the consciousness of being culturally literate, so it has to be artificially instilled. Hence, we can take for granted that the elites will continue to do their best to equip their own children with this knowledge and to send them to schools that furnish substantial quantities of it. But neither our culture, our politics, our civic life, nor our principles of equal opportunity can be satisfactorily maintained. But most youngsters enter adulthood with little knowledge of this kind. You hear that? This is why we're studying the project. Our culture, our politics, our civil life, our principles cannot be maintained. The reason these things are breaking down is because we have lost the knowledge of the humanities. And I will not now digress into many parasitic elements of the society that we live in, except to say that the reason these things obtain is because we have lost that idea of our politics, our culture, our civic life, our principles. We have lost the common consciousness of what we are as a society. We have come to see ourselves as atomized individuals, little babies that exist on this earth to have our childish needs served by people we hire, strangers we hire. We've lost the concept of our culture. We've lost the concept of our. I'll give you one example. I won't give you a whole list, a whole litany of examples. I'll give you one example that's appropriate to Apocatastasis's. And that is the college loan crisis. That was one of the main reasons this college came into existence, because of the sacrificing of youth. A society that has this mechanism of the most naked and aggressive sort of predation on youth, a society that tolerates this, is a society which has lost the concept of R. You can only have the banks and the loan sharks in the position of safety and indeed of authority that they have obtained and allowed to do without any restraints, and in fact with every encouragement by the civil structure. This could only obtain because we individually have lost for decades the concept of a society. We do not have a society. We are living around each other. And that's why we can sit back and watch 3 generations of young people completely turned over to the most aggressive, rack-renting users that you can imagine for the remainder of their lives. People will not be able to pay off these loans. There are men who will die at 80 years of age for loans they took out when they were 20. The only way this could obtain, and that these parasites could behave this way towards the vulnerable young people of our society, is because as a society, we have got an amnesia. We have forgotten that we are a society. And that's what these authors are saying. And that's why we study the project. We have to realize that we have a common culture. Yes, as Americans, but even more broadly to the project as humanity. We have lost that concept. Part of that has to do with the lack of reading, because when you don't read, your ability to think in abstract ways like we're all in this together also degrades. It is on that conviction that we base our reply to all who inspect the evidence in this book and conclude that the students did better than might have been expected, that they did reasonably well, and that they did well enough, that the proverbial glass is a bit more than half full. It is not that the complacency of this attitude irks us. It is the elitism lurking within it that the citizens of a democracy must not condone. We cannot settle for an education system that imparts passable amounts of important knowledge to its most fortunate students, whilst the majority learn less than the minimum required for successful participation in the society they are about to enter. And I will add, only on an economical level at that. The genius of the project, the genius of setting out on this study, even if you don't enroll in Apocatastasis, is to end that amnesia, that cultural amnesia that you and I have fallen into. The beauty of this project, if you join us for the next 13 weeks and the 13 weeks after that, and the 26 weeks after that, making a full year, and then do it again next year and the year after. If you do that, your amnesia about who you are on this earth will go away. And the isolation, which parasites are able to benefit so much from, and so materially from, that will go away. Do that enough, and enough people do that besides, and those parasites and their systems will go away. Are you kind of getting what we're on about at Apocatastasis at this point? If you enrich the culture like an immune system, the parasites go away. The reason, just to use the one example of 1,000, the reason you can have an out-of-control student loan industry, and the reason you can have it so powerful that the civil state sits down like good little Catholic schoolboys. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. What can I do for you, Mr. Banker? How can I sell out the youth of this country more, Mr. Banker? The reason you can do that is because the immune system, if you like, the culture, the soil, whatever simile you want, of this so-called society is profoundly degraded. That's why parasites, like bankers, are able to obtain. And that's why what dares call itself education is in the state that it is. Our cultural immunity is weak because partially, although largely, and those are not contradictory terms as we've gotten through, to be partially something and not and largely something are not contradictory terms. We are setting off on this project to reclaim this idea of a common cultural life. We are all part of a single humanity. When that consciousness obtains, with the beauty of national and religious cultures and familial cultures and regional cultures, these things are not contradictory consciousnesses. When this idea, this reality, this truth of humanity, what we're doing on this earth, when this obtains through things like the project, parasites in our communities will go away, and parasitical systems in our community will go away. That is the MO of apocatastasis. Nor need we be fatalistic about this distribution of knowledge. It is not adventitious. It is within the capability of adults and the capacity, educators, parents, librarians, television producers, YouTube producers, though I'd never call myself such. I'd sooner be a BitChute producer, and all the rest, to take the steps by which our youngsters learn enough to participate in selecting our leaders, in shaping our culture, renewing our civic life, discussing, resolving the important issues before us. One premise of our democratic society, as Mr. Jefferson recognized 2 centuries ago, is that for it to truly succeed, all its members must have an education that will, quote, enable every man to judge for himself what will secure or endanger his freedom, unquote. That's the safety cord. That's the red cord that was engineered into modern liberal societies, the engaged and educated electorate. We, the authors of this article, believe that this remains a valid premise now and for the future. We hope it is clear that we do not make a case for a single immutable body of knowledge that is to be transmitted from one generation to the next, like an uncut diamond. Both history and literature are shaped and transformed by the social context in which they are studied. As a nation and a people, we continually add to, reconsider, and redefine the history that we study because we tell a story to ourselves about who we are and how we got that way. I might interject that maybe we've gone too much into redefining our history and things like that. There could be a bit more conservatism, and I do not mean that in any sense of a political conservatism, but I think a cultural conservatism in the sense that perhaps we've brought too much under the microscope of revisionism, and that we've lost in doing so, maybe in this excess, we've lost the idea of having a core story, in the sense it's a core history. It's not bad, again, I also don't mean this in any sort of political way, it's not bad as a society to have a common core. I'm not referring to the Obama administration curricula, by the way. I'm not referring to that, but I'm saying the idea of having a common social core of knowledge is not a bad thing, and that if the Rockefeller schools are bad for shattering knowledge, I would say 10 times worse is the shattering of modalities into homeschool, unschool, road school, wild school. All of this is actually a symptom. All of these alternative modalities are a symptom of the problem. They're not a solution. We really do need to recapture the idea of a common mythological study. And I don't mean that solely in the spiritual way, although that has to obtain, I believe, as well. But a historical mythology, a single thing, which we can rally around. We've lost that completely, especially as the baby boomers who still had something of that age out. Others who disagree with consensus version write conflicting interpretations, and these are often so persuasive that in time they will change the way we see the past. I mean, that's exactly what we're looking at, where we are in the tricky pickle of not agreeing on anything, much less history, much less a single historical narrative. So we really must rebuild this for a common sense of identity, even though it have weaknesses. I said that before with the outline of history. This has, I believe, weaknesses. H.G. Wells is outline of history has definite weaknesses. Anything I've written has definite weaknesses. Anything you've written has the same. We need to understand that, warts and all, well, sometimes the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. Sometimes it's better to have a lame, wasp, nationalistic understanding of consciousness, like obtained through the last century, kind of a replacement of the previous religious mythology, which gave people meaning, was the nationalist mythology. Sometimes that is better, for warts and all, than not having anything to agree on, which is where we're at right now. And that's going to speed up very quickly with your AIs and with the artificial pictures and so forth. In this way, the authors say, history changes as it is revised by new discoveries, fresh interpretations, and altered understandings of what American society is, has been, and should be. Literature changes too, as new writers add their contributions and emerge as important voices in the American dialogue. Our conceptions of literature also changed with the discovery of writers whose works were ignored when they wrote, but whose voices now seem prophetic, speaking to our own time with an urgency that was neglected during their lifetimes. No one can know everything. It is possible to spend a lifetime studying history or literature without reading every important book or learning about every significant event. The most we can hope for in the years of formal schooling is that students learn how to tell the important from the unimportant, that they know enough about literature to distinguish for themselves what is fine and what is dross, that they know enough about history to inform themselves about the vital connections between the present and the past, and that they cultivate a desire to learn more, and that they acquire a foundation of knowledge on which to build for the rest of their lives. So you have your Uncle Jedediah Carr here. We're setting out on the project. Let's learn this too, that to be educated is an attitude. To be educated does not mean you know a lot of things. To be educated does not mean that you have a degree from a high school or a college. However, very often that background will make it much easier to be educated. So if being educated is not having a lot of knowledge, nor necessarily being formally schooled, what does it mean to be educated? To be educated means, as our authors just said in other words, that you have an attitude towards knowledge and towards study. That is the defining criteria of being educated, is your attitude and mine towards knowledge, the men of knowledge, and a consciousness of our own ignorance when it comes to this knowledge. We can work on it, we can chip away at our ignorance, but we need that humility. That's what makes a man educated. And we must gather that, and that's the genius of the project and why it allows us both the organization, or the skeleton, as I've used the simile, the skeleton in a 2-year cycle of human life on this earth and human culture, human history, literature, so forth, philosophy. It gives us the stable structure, and yet allows us to, walk off of that path and go down a little rabbit hole and to build off of it. And this is what a good formal education provides. That's why I said, whilst it is true that going to a school does not make you educated, and indeed I come from a country called America where nearly everyone has a high school degree and next to everyone has a college degree, and in no sense whatsoever could you say the American people are educated. They are an arrogant people when it comes to knowledge, because they've confused credentialism and access to data for being educated. All of that being said, one of the reasons we want schools in society, and one of the reasons we don't want schools to go away, is because schools are an excellent environment potentially to acquire this quality of soul, this quality of humility, this ultimate quality of education. For all of the warts and wrinkles of schools now, public, private, and home, that environment is conducive, more conducive than Joe Blow on his computer just clicking on random links for 20 years. The environment of a school is this controlled study, this disciplined study, and it is very conducive, has the potential in a way that nothing else can for instilling the humble and inquisitive hunger for knowledge, which is education. Fundamentally, that is what education is. Does it do it well? Not at all. Not at all. But that doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because schools have dropped the ball and schoolmen have dropped the ball on producing a true spirit of education in the population, just because that is the case, in my opinion, does not mean we get rid of schools, because the type of anti-intellectualism, the type of chaos of knowledge is just going to speed up, right? Okay, let's put it this way. Whatever failures you see in formal schooling modalities that fall short of how I've defined education, that's going to be a lot worse without schools. And with that, we'll continue this piece here. This is a tall order. We do not think it is impossible an order, however, nor do we think it is beyond the capacity of our educating institutions. Certainly, it is not beyond the capability of our 17-year-olds. And once again, this article was a chapter adaptation from a September 1987 article from Education Week. Why study history and literature? Now, history and literature form the real core of our project here at Apocatastastis. And whilst this was, specifically aimed at a high school discipulate, it's true just for us as well. There are many, many words there. And as we're preparing, you and I, week by week, to get through human history over the next year and 2 years in Apocatastasis's project, which you, without even enrolling, can participate on these video platforms. Now, if you're hungry for more, you want a little bit more or a lot bit more, I encourage you to enroll. And in that instance, you will have private in-person classes, writing assignments, reading assignments beyond just the weekly selection from the project, kind of branching out, fleshing out the specifics that we get through with Wells, and also class discussions, private class discussions on the topics at hand. So if you want to get deeper, check out our enrollment page. And of course, we have dozens of other standalone classes besides the project as well. Hey, here's one. Mathematics with Vandana. Okay, so we're going to check the tech here, and everything looks nice. Always have to check things and make sure the audio is good. Very good. Sufficiently calming, I trust. Okay, now this introduction comes from H.G. Wells. As I mentioned, on our project site, you can download Volume 1 starting next week, and it will have critiques of Wells's outline. So that's okay. You can have weak points. Every writing does. But it can still be valuable. So H.G. Wells says, this outline of history is an attempt to tell truly and clearly in one continuous narrative the whole story of life and mankind so far as it is known today, It is written plainly for the general reader, and its aim goes beyond its use as merely interesting reading matter. There is a feeling abroad that the teaching of history, considered as a part of general education, is in an unsatisfactory condition, and particularly that the ordinary treatment of this so-called subject by the class and teacher and examiner is too partial and narrow. But the desire to extend the general range of historical ideas is confronted by the argument that the available time for instruction is already consumed by that partial and narrow treatment, and that therefore, however desirable this extension of range may be, it is in practice impossible. If an Englishman, for example, has found the history of England quite enough for his powers of assimilation, then it seems hopeless to expect his sons and daughters to master universal history. If that is to consist of the history of England, plus the history of France, plus the history of Germany, plus that of Russia, and so on, to which the only possible answer is that universal history is at once something more and something less than the aggregate of the national histories to which we are accustomed, and that it must be approached in a different spirit and dealt with in a different manner. This book seeks to justify that answer. It has been written primarily to show that history as one whole, and this is italicized, you'll notice, amenable to a more broad and comprehensive handling than is the history of a special nation and periods, a broader handling than will bring it within the normal limitations of time and energy set to the reading and education of an ordinary citizen. There's nothing in this outline and in the project which is not graspable by your average Joe. And I think we've lost that to the previous article. We're going back to this error that the life of the mind is not something for the working man. It's not something for the parent. It's not someone for the jobber. And it is. Our capacities can grasp these points of history and literature and the unified understanding of consciousness on this earth. Absolutely. If we apply ourselves, if we discipline ourselves. Right? That's what's going to be needed as we load up on Uncle Jedediah's educational wagon here, as we're setting out on the project for the next 13 weeks and thereafter, over the next 2 years. As we're setting out, one thing that we need to throw on the wagon is discipline. We could spend our whole life, many men do, just clicking on things, frittering from one book to another book, to a magazine, to a radio station. What we need setting out week by week, it doesn't take much, but we do need a level of discipline. That's what this project requires, is the discipline to stick with this study. Not through just one cycle, but for indefinite cycles. And that's where the fruit of the project will yield itself in years to come. This outline deals with ages and races and nations, where the ordinary history deals with reigns and pedigrees and campaigns. But it will not be found to be more crowded with names and dates, nor more difficult to follow and understand. History is no exception amongst the sciences. As the gaps fill in, the outline simplifies, and the outlook broadens. The clustering multitude of details dissolves into general laws, and many topics of quite primary interest to mankind and first appearance, and the growth in scientific knowledge, for example, and its effects upon human life, and the elaboration of the ideas of money and credit, the story of origins, the spread and influence of Christianity, which must be treated fragmentarily or by elaborate digressions in any other partial history. All of these arise and flow completely and naturally in one general record of the world in which we live. Right, getting back to that R, that common consciousness that liberal education provides. The need for a common knowledge of the general facts of human history throughout the world has become very evident during the tragic happenings of the last few years. Now, this book was originally published in 1920. So he's, of course, referring to the Great War, as he would have called it, or the First World War, as we call it now. Swifter means of communication have brought all men closer to one another for good or for evil. War becomes a universal disaster, blind and monstrously destructive. It bombs the baby in its cradle and sinks the flood ships that cater for the non-combatant and the neutral. There can be no peace now, we realize, but a common peace in all the world. No prosperity, but a general prosperity. I should say that H.G. Wells is certainly an advocacy of socialism. And I believe he was a Fabian socialist, if memory serves. So we can talk about that. You don't need to be. I don't need to be. But we don't need to see him as being up to no good. Right? We need to, as educated men, realize that other people have different ideas. And we don't have to agree with those ideas, but you can certainly see, in any instance, Wells' socialism already popping its nose out, let's say. Without such ideas to hold them together in harmonious cooperation, with nothing but narrow, selfish, and conflicting nationalist traditions, races, and peoples, are bound to drift towards conflict and destruction. This truth, which was apparent to that great philosopher Kant a century or more ago, it is the gist of his tract upon universal peace, is now plain to the man in the street. Our internal policies and economic and social ideas are profoundly variated at present by wrong and fantastic ideas of the origin and historical relationship of social classes. A sense of history as the common adventure of all mankind as necessary for peace within as it is for peace between nations. And we'll bring the bird down here on this first pregame of our project. We're packing up here to head off on our journey. So again, starting next week, for the next 13 weeks for the fall term, we're going to be getting through the first stretch of the outline of history. I will also be adding a lot of literature and so forth in class, philosophy and whatnot. And then behind the scenes, these will be added textually to Volume 1. So starting next week, Volume 1 will consist of our monthly cursus of poetry, and then the first 13 weeks of the outline of history. And then subsequent versions of this, subsequent drafts, will have a deeper integrated study involving the story of civilization as well as literature. And again, if you want a parallel, think of the Christian Breviary, particularly the Office of Readings. If you're familiar with the Office of Readings, you'll see what I'm kind of basing this secular project, this humanistic project on. The idea is not to have every single facet of human life covered. That's impossible, certainly within the bounds of 4 volumes. The purpose is to give us and you, as part of our learning community at a distance, to give us a skeleton upon which to hang our appreciation of human life, a story which we are part of, and it is our study. We're going to pick up with the cavemen next week, and with prehistory, and with the mists of time. That is our study, and every single day from then to now is our life. It is our culture. It is our world. And that is the genius of this project, is giving this unified study and this unified skeleton. All right. So there you go. You can check all about the project, including how you can engage in a deeper way by enrolling in Apocatastasис, whether that's our monthly students, very convenient for adults, especially family men and women. Also, bi-weekly students and our full-time students, or also, certainly not least, still listed last, those of you who choose to enroll in just a standalone course, in which instance you can get a lot deeper into a specific aspect of history than the project typically allows. The purpose of the project isn't so much to go deep, it's to get this synoptical view of human history, which will allow you in further studies at Apocatastasis or elsewhere to dig much deeper. Once you have that unified vision, then you can make heads or tails of more specified studies. One of the weaknesses, I think, of modern history studies, especially in the college level, is you get 4 years of specialized study for classes, but you never get an overall view. Now, that's probably because the college teachers are assuming you got something like that in high school, but that is one hell of an assumption at this point. That might have been true 100 years ago, that one would enter college with a synoptical, mile wide, inch deep of view of human life. That certainly is not the case these days. All right. What is the case these days is that an hour and a half is about as long as we're going to go for on these weekly broadcasts. Of course, if you enroll for the private part of this project, for class, we go much deeper, and we go a bit longer as well in the private studies. So that does it for us this week, this pregame, this last time you're going to see me without a tie for a good long stretch. So I'll be enjoying the last stretch of this holiday, although we still have plenty of weeks of robust summer ahead of us. The holiday section in these United States is winding down, but it's not over yet. So I'm going to enjoy it and make the most of it, and I'll catch you next week for week 1 officially of the project Apocatastasis Unified Humanities Curricula, with many variations for you. Thank you so much. Take care.